shadowed corners where reality frays, there exists documented evidence of mankind's collision with entities not of our world. What follows is an account of perhaps the most disturbing footage ever captured in the annals of paranormal investigation. Evidence that even the most hardened skeptic would struggle to dismiss. Ed Warren, a man who peered unflinchingly into abysses few would dare approach, left behind a legacy of confrontations with malevolence. Among these encounters, one stands as a testament to the thin membrane separating our realm from something far more sinister. The case began with a desperate phone call in the winter of 1977. A family of 5, the Blackwoods, reached out to the Warrens after 3 months of escalating phenomena that had reduced them to hollow-eyed specters of their former selves. Their colonial home in Woodbury, Connecticut, built in 1734 on land once used for executions during the early settlement period, had awakened with a voracious appetite. It started with whispers in empty rooms, children's toys rearranged in patterns that formed crude, archaic symbols. The family dog refused to enter the home after finding it disemboweled in the root cellar, arranged in a perfect circle, its blood used to mark the walls with symbols that predated written language. We've documented hauntings, residual energy, even demonic infestations, Lorraine Warren noted in her preliminary assessment. This is something older, something that doesn't belong in our world at all. The family had fled weeks prior, their psyches fractured by what they described as a presence that fed on their terror. The property stood abandoned, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the gathering dusk. Local clergy had attempted an intervention, 3 separate denominations. None would return for a second visit. The footage begins innocuously, Warren's weathered face illuminated by weak lamplight as he enters the colonial home. His team consisted of 5, 2 camera operators, an audio specialist, a seminary student with experience in exorcism rites, and a reluctant medium who refused to cross the threshold until Warren personally coaxed her inside. There's a gravity to this place, Warren narrates to camera, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Like the air itself has weight. Notice how sounds seem muffled, how light struggles to penetrate corners. The investigative team documented temperature anomalies throughout the home, cold spots that moved against air currents, following team members like predators stalking prey. The medium, Eleanor Graves, collapsed 20 minutes into the investigation, blood vessels in her eyes rupturing as she gasped, "It's in the walls. It's always been in the walls. It was here before the house." Warren moves methodically through the dwelling, his breath forming pale clouds in the unnatural cold. The temperature gauge in frame drops precipitously, from 68 degrees to 41 in mere moments. The camera operator's hands begin to tremble, not from weight, but from something primordial stirring in human instinct. "It's aware of us," Warren whispers, his voice unnaturally flat. "It's calculating." The audio track captures something the human ear initially misses, a low rumbling frequency that seems to emanate not from any point in the room, but from the recording equipment itself. Sound engineers would later confirm this anomalous frequency exists below the normal threshold of human hearing, yet induces profound anxiety when played back. 3 hours of footage document escalating phenomena, cabinet doors opening against gravity, the medium's religious medallion heating until it blistered the skin of her chest through clothing, a child's ball rolling upstairs, each thump marking a deliberate rhythm that musicologists would later identify as matching funerary dirges from pre-colonial Native American burial rites. At precisely 37 minutes into the investigation, the footage captures what Warren's detractors have never adequately explained. The main staircase, visible in frame, begins to weep a viscous, dark substance. The camera lurches forward as Warren approaches, his gloved finger touching the liquid before pulling back sharply. "Something ancient," he murmurs, "something that was never human." Analysis of samples would reveal a compound containing human hemoglobin, but with a protein structure that biochemists described as evolutionarily impossible. A molecular arrangement that would require millions of years of divergent development from known human biology. The house begins to respond to their presence with increasing hostility. Floorboards contract and expand as though the structure itself is breathing. The audio captures voices, layered, overlapping whispers that, when isolated and enhanced, contain fragments in dozens of languages, some extinct for centuries. The seminary student, Thomas Kelly, begins transcribing what he recognizes, phrases in Latin, ancient Greek, and Aramaic, before his pen tears through the paper, carving the same symbol repeatedly into the wooden table beneath. He doesn't notice until Warren physically restrains his hand. The symbol matches carvings found in the basement foundation, carvings carbon dated to predate the home's construction by at least 300 years. The true horror manifests at 4213. The camera pans across the master bedroom when all ambient light is suddenly devoured. Not dimmed, consumed. In that impenetrable darkness, the audio captures Warren's measured breathing suddenly stopping. For 13 seconds there is nothing. Then, a voice. Not Warren's. Not human. The words themselves have been analyzed by linguistics experts from 3 universities, none of whom can identify the language. The syllables seem to fold in on themselves, creating phonetic patterns impossible for human vocal cords to produce, yet the intent behind them translates universally. Malice. When emergency lighting activates, Warren is observed standing motionless, facing the corner. Blood trickles from his right ear. When he finally turns, his eyes reflect the light unnaturally, pupils constricted to pinpoints despite the surrounding darkness. "It showed me," he whispers, voice cracking. "God help me, it showed me where it comes from." Warren later described in a sealed testimony only opened after his death what he witnessed in those 13 seconds of darkness. A plane of existence where our physical laws are mere suggestions, where time moves both forward and backward simultaneously. I saw beings, if such a word can apply, that perceive our reality as we might perceive a painting, flat, limited, accessible from all sides at once, and they are hungry for what we possess: consciousness, emotion, the capacity for spiritual transcendence. The entity manifests then, not as Hollywood would imagine, but as something far more profoundly wrong. The footage captures a distortion in space, a violation of physical law. Objects in the room's periphery bend toward a central point that seems to recede infinitely inward. The camera's digital artifacts multiply, not from technical failure, but as though reality itself resists being recorded. A shadow detaches from the corner, moving not across surfaces, but through them. Warren stands immobile as it approaches. The temperature plummets to 28 degrees. The shadow passes through Warren's body, and for a single frame, confirmed by multiple video technicians, Warren's features contort into something unrecognizable. The entity's passage leaves physical evidence. 3 deep gouges appear in the floorboards, cutting through century-old oak as though it were tissue paper. Forensic analysis would later detect trace elements unknown to the periodic table within these marks. Warren collapses afterwards, unconscious for nearly 7 minutes. The footage captures the remaining team's panic as they attempt to revive him, while the house itself seems to awaken fully around them. Picture frames slam against walls, glass shattering in patterns that a mathematics professor from MIT would later identify as expressing prime number sequences. The medium begins speaking in Warren's voice, reciting details from his childhood that he had never shared publicly. Upon waking, Warren refuses to discuss what transpired, while the entity occupied the same space as his physical form. The only statement he provides, recorded as the team hastily vacates the premises: "It's not trapped there, it's waiting for an invitation, and now it knows we're looking." The footage shows their retreat from the property. As the final team member crosses the threshold, every door and window in the house slams shut simultaneously. The structure itself seems to exhale, a pulsation visible in the exterior siding that architectural engineers would later testify was structurally impossible. 3 crew members would never participate in another investigation. One would take his own life 6 months later, leaving behind journals filled with drawings of a singular, recurring image, a doorway filled with darkness. The medium, Eleanor Graves, lost her psychic abilities permanently, describing the sensation as spiritual amputation, and spent the remainder of her life in a Carmelite convent under a vow of silence. The Blackwood house still stands, though it has changed hands 17 times in 4 decades. No owner has remained longer than 8 months. Local records show an unusually high incidence of psychiatric hospitalizations, sudden fatal illnesses, and suicide among former residents. Warren himself would refer to this case only reluctantly in later years. When pressed about the footage in a rare 1994 interview, he responded, "Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The footage exists as evidence, yes, but also as a warning. There are entities that have never been human, never been alive as we understand life, that nonetheless possess an intelligence and purpose. They perceive our reality as territory to be colonized." The complete, unedited Warren footage exists now in a Vatican archive, sealed by special order after a senior exorcist suffered an apparent stroke while reviewing it in 1989. The publicly available version contains significant redactions, particularly the 13 seconds of complete darkness and what immediately followed. For those with eyes to see, it confirms what lurks beyond our comprehension, entities that do not merely haunt our physical spaces, but hunger for something far more precious, our souls. For those who dismiss the footage as elaborate hoax or misunderstood natural phenomena, perhaps that skepticism is a mercy. As Warren himself wrote in his final unpublished manuscript, "The most terrifying truth isn't that such entities exist, it's that they've always existed, patient and watchful, waiting for us to finally notice them. And that attention, that recognition, is precisely what they've wanted all along." The Blackwood property was quietly purchased by a research foundation in 2017. The house was systematically dismantled, each component carefully preserved and stored in separate locations across 3 continents. The land remains vacant, surrounded by security fencing and surveillance equipment that, with curious frequency, experiences inexplicable malfunctions precisely 13 minutes after midnight.